Welcome to The Chat. Come behind the inbound scenes of some of the world's fastest growing companies. For the past 10 years as Chatmetrics, we've had an exclusive inside view of how these industry leaders are revolutionising inbound marketing and sales across diverse sectors. Each week, we bring you conversations with top minds in marketing and sales who share insider secrets and strategies for driving inbound success. Join us on The Chat, your front row seat to the future of inbound. Today on The Chat, I'm joined by Federico Presicci, Director of Sales Enablement at GetAccept. He's built systems that align sales, messaging and coaching to drive real growth, not just more noise. In this episode, we get into what makes positioning stick, why most enablement fails, and how to use AI without losing clarity or creativity. Let's get into it.
Thank you for having me, Terry.
Welcome. Where do you think that teams should stop using AI in messaging, and where can it actually make things better, Federico?
Stop using AI messaging. Certainly something that AI should not be shied away, because I think it's still a necessary tool. And I think the more we, let's say, not work with it, the higher is the danger, of course, to be left behind, especially because AI in every front, even when it comes to writing, for example, I've experienced how much better has become over the last 12 months as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the first important thing is to be able to have, when you're writing messaging, have the necessary intelligence that is provided, let's say, to AI, or if you're using, for example, agents, if you're using like some sort of automation to support messaging, for example, reps have to send out to different types of personas or customers. In such a case, is the most important bit to get right is that if I'm in enablement, or if you're in product marketing or marketing, is making sure that the ICP information, the everything to do with the personas, this intelligence layer essentially that you have refined and you're continuing to refine over time, informs the way the messaging is sent out. And that way you can make sure that there is some common thread, right? Now, of course, there is a point on not only then what is the intelligence feeding everything, but of course how the AI tool is used in the first place by a rep or by anyone who's sending out externally facing messaging. Because, well, the reality is, of course, if it's too heavy and it is AI made and so forth, we know that now bias tune off, and that is a problem. And therefore, again, there is a lot of enablement that can be done to people to understand how to better utilize those tools. In this case, probably we're talking AI tools, to write in a way that it really enhances the way you will write, rather than being necessarily per se a complete, let's say, automation of that without thought. So that's an important consideration, I would say.
Yeah, so really magnifying your own voice rather than becoming a fabrication.
Yeah, I think, and of course, there are two ways. Sometimes, of course, you do start with the AI that has what has written, and then, of course, you modify accordingly. And then the other side, of course, is sometimes you just write something and then use the AI to elevate it. In most cases, I know that the second one works best, but understanding many contexts in organization, that's not the case, because, of course, you've got the tools that is creating the AI generated like email, messaging on the spot, because we use as well, AI copilots, all these kind of tools, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I think also for a meeting summary, to be honest, no big deal, because these things are just automated. It's okay, but more about communication and things like that are more like, especially at certain stages of the sales cycle where things become a little more critical. I think that giving that personal touch, the human touch, is very important. So I think it has to be, that's why human oversight is very important still to be there in order, for things to work properly. And I think businesses should not just run, especially for the things that are more critical in relation to customer and prospect, should run entirely based on AI without human oversight.
So have you seen any time where AI has taken over, or it's gone a little bit too far, or it's been used too much without a person checking it properly, where there's been some problems?
Yeah, I mean, not in that sense, like, fully. Of course, I speak to many leaders, I speak to many, especially, I mean, a lot of the DCI stuff as well are handled by revenue operations often, I know. So that can be things like, of course, I mean, directly, one thing we've tried is the AI SDRs, and, we trialed it for 3 months or so. So our RevOps director decided to test it out and see how we could basically expand our, like, let's say, reach in terms of, okay, having more account and perhaps not necessarily like the perfect fit fully, but we're just expanding slightly our SAP to see how they respond. It was basically a test. And for the most part, of course, these AI SDR often what they have is they have like different emails. They are warming up those emails to try and improve deliverability, and then they're sending, I don't know, it could be like some 1,000 emails a day or something like that. And they, are provided with documentations and everything about the company, ICP and so forth. And then they go out there doing stuff. And I think they can also utilize LinkedIn as well. So at the end, I mean, there were a few meetings booked over this period, 3 months. But to be fair, in relation to the actual output that was put it out there, as yeah, promising as we thought, or especially as the RevOps person that was really handling it thought. So in the end, we didn't really progress further with the tool itself, and we're finding other better way in terms of being able to actually, rather than necessarily increase volume, because of course it's still trying to make things more efficient for the reps, but more about like can we increase precision in terms of utilizing data signals and all this kind of stuff to be able to basically know when a potential prospect or when an account is more, let's say, warm to be reached out to because of various factors. So I think that is definitely a better play, and also where AI still can help, because AI can be a very powerful aggregator of data, and I think that's probably a better use of data than just blasting out there like in an efficient manner with the ISDR. Now, I'm sure there are probably other companies out there that have implemented it, like, and maybe it's working. But I do know, though, that there are many organizations that have tested and tried the ISDR, and of course, has been very much hit and miss. Other situation, of course, are also when it comes to maybe inbound handling, like, sort of like communication. Of course, AI has been leveraged in many of those situations to try and reduce the amount of, work that someone might do from support or other functions. And yeah, that as well, you need to be in a way careful, because of course, if AI is not very, in a way, there isn't some oversight at some point to understand how these interactions are going. What can happen is, of course, maybe the AI goes off track in terms of not being able to respond in the way that it should respond to customer queries, things like that, or just providing inaccurate information. And then what happened, that damages trust, right? And trust is, as we know, it takes a long time to build, and then you lose it very quickly. So, and then that can really damage interaction you're having with your customer. And there are stories that I've read in different places like Reddit as well, where every now and then I do check on what's going on with AI as well, where, maybe people implemented an AI chatbot, and then all of a sudden you have a 90% drop in requests that previously came through, because, the buyers are now realizing these AI don't want to interact with your website or whatever that you're leveraging.
It's interesting. We see a similar sort of thing across our customer base as well. Whenever we test and move away from it being obviously a live person in the live chat and having it as either a chatbot or an AI, we make it appear that way. It's still a real person in there. We don't want to miss anything, but there's a lot less engagement. There's just a lot less people want to talk to a chatbot or AI, it seems. Certainly across our customer base, sort of, that mid-market, mid-tier with larger deal sizes. So I think for sure it's something that we're definitely seeing. Do you think that as far as the AI SDRs are concerned, I know you haven't had much experience with them directly, but are you hearing anything in terms of improving? Because I've heard the same thing. A lot of businesses got very excited when they heard about the AI SDRs. All of a sudden, we can get rid of 50 SDRs and put in 2 AI SDRs and triple the volume. But from what I've heard is that they're burning through their total available market so quickly, then they're just getting through it in such a short amount of time because of the massive volume that they can do.
Yeah.
And like you said, you're booking a few meetings, but from a conversion rate perspective, it's really, they're not performing that well at all.
Yeah, no, I think the way I see it is that I've actually interacted with a few companies that are, I think, approaching the problem in a different way, which is, I think, interesting. The way you can look at it is you can have like an intelligence layer, as I discussed before. Like, what's important for any agents that is used is the intelligence layer. That's the most valuable thing you ever get. And I do believe, again, that, for example, look about enablement has a big role in helping out, in shaping that intelligence layer that then the AI agents are deployed from. And that can, of course, AI agents can be deployed by the RevOps people. Generally, they are the more like focus on the technical stuff and looking at how everything integrates with the CRM, for example. But there are also enablement people that are very technical. In some yes, I can also intervene. But that's the first layer, right? And then once you have like that layer, which even an AI SDR can, immediately have, because at the end of the day, AI SDR could be considered agents are out there like leveraging information, then acting. is that you can have like an AI agent that, for example, all it does is aggregating your signals and do the research for you. So then it provides you, for example, it provides a rep with all of the information about this company, the most important bits, and then also maybe some important information about the prospect as well. Then that can be something that they can have at their fingertips and leveraging immediately to basically create messaging. Now, then you can have as well, of course, the generative AI that can support you with using that information, using the background information of ICP and everything to draft the message that it can be sent out. But then there is also like a part on the combination of those two already. Just if you take those two, the fact that you're aggregating data, helping with the research, and on top of that, supporting with the messaging, all with a baseline framework that is the company framework, then already provides a higher, I think, control over the use of AI, but still is increasing output and efficiency, for example, and in a way that doesn't need to get to the level of an AI SDR, but still would provide the results in the sense that you can have a one AE or one SDR, for example, they might do double their output without sacrificing quality. That's the question, right? Because we're trying to make trade-offs, but the question I think is also, can we actually not make the trade-off and be able to, increase the output in a way, but without sacrificing the quality of it, or actually even improving it compared to an SDR without information would do. And I think best use case as far as outreach and getting out there is concerned is aggregating data and signals that are coming from different tools. AI is very, super powerful at that. On top of that, you can also have other use cases like where the AI agents can actually filter your accounts based on ICP automatically, right? You don't have to do much. It just provides you directly with the thing that are already filtered out based on criteria that, again, have been set by the company. And that's why, again, whoever is in charge of the intelligence layer that's the most critical thing today. I think companies need to understand, as we all know, like the data that you feed into the AI, really is related very strongly to the output. So intelligence has to be super strong. If that's not, then probably you get poor results in the first place, even before you even think about training the reps on how to use it.
There's a recurring theme in these conversations, Federico, where people are talking about the AI and they will mention that it's about something that's a feed, it's the input, it's making sure that, as you've said, the signals are correct that goes in. At this stage, for me, AI is still a little bit like a tool. It's like a machine learning. It's the old software adage, garbage in, garbage out. I think there's so much, it's not the AI that's making mistakes or not doing things properly. If it's not had the correct input from the start, there's not been the right effort to go into it. I mean, it's different when you're blasting a market with high volume. It's hard to get it down to those refined pieces. But I think what you're talking about with regards to getting the signaling in that right, then all of a sudden you're moving away from mass multiplication back to 2x or 3x because the individual's still the one that's doing the interaction and has that final filter across the messaging that goes through it. That seems to be the model that's working at the moment.
Yeah, and if you get, honestly, and also reality, not only that, but if you, let's say you 2x your output, but also you, let's say 2x your conversion, then we're talking already like order of magnitude that are very high. So you don't necessarily have to 10x your output, right? So I think it's always that play conversions versus, effectiveness versus efficiency. I think if you play it right with both, you can really 4x your actual results, which at the end of the day is what actually matters. And also very important as well is the buyer experience you're providing, whether you or even call it sales experience you're providing, because that also today, especially in tech, where there is a lot of competition, the tools often are very similar, is actually what makes a difference, right? So how they have felt during the buying process, whether they were the stakeholders, does matter a lot. And people make decisions based on that. At the end of the day, still is a human factor in the equation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, Oliver, it particularly depends a lot on the deal size as well. The bigger the deals, the more humans got to be involved.
Sure.
And so from
absolutely. Side. Yeah, no, that's of course, yeah. Then if you go, that's a very important dimension, because things become a lot more nuanced as you start to look at the dimensions for sure.
Yeah.
So the other spectrum enterprise, yeah.
We might switch it up a little bit here, and I'm interested to talk about, you've got a theme where you argue that most companies copy what others are saying instead of clarifying what only they can say. And that lack of clarity makes outbound weaker and conversions lower and funnels heavier and all of the things that go along with it. So how do you refine messaging and positioning for your individual company so that it is standing out as the only thing that they can say,
Yeah.
or that only they can say.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, of course, and I don't believe like it doesn't need to be like, I mean, uniqueness. I think is also brought by individual, and also there is an element, of course, of branding and tone and how we want to talk and so forth. I think it definitely can be embedded in your AI today. That's actually a very powerful thing to do. In terms of the messaging, not too long ago, actually, I've worked on building a messaging framework for the company, and what's interesting today is that you can combine AI in different ways. So way I've approached is first defining a framework. So you define a framework where the idea is to, let's say you have segments. You might have like, as we discussed before, you might have like small businesses, you might have like mid-size, and then you might have a large enterprise. So let's say we have three segments. And then within those segments, you have different personas. So in the small businesses, maybe you have the founder, maybe you have, I don't know, the CFO, and maybe, I mean, we sell into sales. So, okay, maybe sales, a salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
Then have a mid-size, of course, you start to have more structure. So you might have also operations and you go enablement. So you have more other personas, and then enterprise, you have even more. So within those, then you have vertical as well, if you want to slightly get more complicated, if it matters to you, right? So I think those are the three main dimensions. So you go like the segment you're in, like in terms of size, business size, then you go, the persona, you go the vertical. Then you normally will have conversation with your customer and the prospect on an ongoing basis. So if you have, for example, an AI copilot on a conversational intelligence tool today, of course, that are tracking most conversation, especially if you're in a field where you can, then that is very valuable information, right? And what you can start to do is that, let's say with marketing and just leadership and go to market, have defined already ICP, all this kind of information, right? Then that is there, and okay, perfect. We have this information. But then when you can start doing as you like your conversation intelligence tool has been recording calls. Now today, with the combination of conversation intelligence and generative AI, and just in general, like the fact you can extrapolate any insights you want from all of the transcripts, then you can start actually using that data to truly inform what matters to the buyers, right? And what is resonating well, what is not going so well, more and other, question you might want to, be answered, right? So what I did in my, kind of approach to actually build a messaging framework is like, okay, I know already is the persona information that marketing has produced in the past, all this kind of stuff. Then I built basically, I've gathered data from our actual conversational intelligence tool, depending on segments. So I've broken down by segments, then start to look by personas. And then I started to fill my own framework that I created. Basically, like there were different elements to the framework where there was, an initial card that describes basically the segment and what are the value drivers for these segments, what kind of context they are in most cases, all this kind of very more general macro information about this type of business. And then you start going layer deeper, right? So you start to go into the vertical, like for example, information about, how things slightly shift for this business size within the specific vertical. And then you go even deeper into the personas. Now, the vertical I found in my experience is it can be really hard to reconcile the three things, the segment, the vertical, and the actual persona information. So in general, I would suggest for companies that don't want to have a headache to start with, to just focus on business size that determines the way a company behaves. And then you have like personas, which is also utilizing an AI, copilot is much easier to work because in some cases with industries, maybe you don't have enough data, enough volume. I mean, unless you have a very specific industry, okay, we have three main industries. These are the one we work in. That's easier. But in many cases, in our case, for example, we have a lot of industries where are very small, like we have a few deals on them, but, we maybe have IT and tech that is quite a lot, a majority of our, let's say, deals. But the rest is very difficult to really say fully that this is how we can generalize. But with personas and things like that, if you're having thousands of every quarter, then it starts to become easier because you're interacting with sales, interacting with sales operation, with
Mm.
enablement, with marketing. And that way, I've been able to build a very comprehensive framework. And today, of course, I built it on my own, and this is thanks to AI, but otherwise you would probably need multiple people to work on it to be that way. Now, what that does is that we have integrated that into everything to do that allows us to create sequences, that allows us to create, calling script, for example, as well, LinkedIn messaging, video messaging on LinkedIn and everything. So the idea is that the reps gets a baseline, a script that is based on this intelligence that they can start with. So it nudges them already. For example, if you don't want to do the work of already like having to write your email or whatever, because today I think it should not be necessary to that extent. You should have a head start. And they can already leverage that. And then they can tweak it, right? So their sequence, they can tweak it. They can also tweak it for their code script, but they still have a code script that is based on that segment that they're focused on, plus the persona they're talking to. And already right there, even without doing any work, you're already giving a better touch of relevancy and personalization to that persona word rather than, just speaking more generically. Now, what we're trying to do as a layer step deeper that you can go into when it comes to messaging is that once you've done this baseline work, you start to use AI on top of it to actually research the actual prospect in details, like, you may work personally, more personal, and then blend what has been discovered, right, in a timely manner with the information that already you create for creating, the sequences, the scripts, and then you kind of create an alternative version of the actual script, for example, on a cold call that is slightly more based on the same baseline, but slightly more refined to even be more personalized. That way, I think you can really truly get to a level of personalization and relevancy without sacrificing quality, but with a much more extreme efficiency. And again,
Mm.
it's all based on, as I said before, on the underlying work that you are doing, which is, I think, two most important things. Number one is the framework you decide to feed the information into, because that is something that will inform everything you search, everything, the question you ask yourself to answer to, that then you can put the information into the framework. And then the quality of the actual data you have. And I think if you're a company that is using an AI copilot or conversational intelligence, that's the most valuable data you will ever get. Like, and I think many companies don't understand that. Many companies don't focus on really trying hard to extrapolate valuable information from their customer, because that can inform as well their GTM decisions that they're making. It can really change the trajectory of your business, right? So if you do so.
It's the highest value information that any organization can have, the voice of the customer, isn't it?
Absolutely,
Mm.
without doubt. Yeah.
Incredible. The framework that you use, is it a basic framework that you can share? Is it something that's very customized for where you are?
No, it's not. It's very general, I would say. I mean, there are different components to it, but to give an idea, like, if you're looking at so if you start from the segment itself, you have information about, okay, what's trends, macro trends that are affecting perhaps, small businesses or something like that. Then you go deeper into what are the value drivers for that company. Of course, when I talk about value drivers, there are many value drivers for a company, but you have to look at those ones that are the value drivers related to your service and product to an extent, right? So there has to
Mhm.
be, because the value driver could be around so many areas of the business. So of course you want to focus on them, but still it's basically what is the value drivers is that what are the things that would make them pay attention, right? So then you can describe pains as well, more generally, what kind of pains these companies tend to have. And, this is kind of a very much like the general information. There are a few other items that you can if you get more specific part of the framework. Then if you go into the persona part, again, there, you're finding the same thing in terms of, okay, what they're measured on, what are the things that keep them at night that are very prominent for them, what are the stakeholders they often work with, who they report generally into, what are typical job titles. And then you're looking at as well, like what they have found, most valuable, for example, in a related product to you based on the data that you have information, what kind of language tends to resonate with them. All this kind of information are in that card. So it's a bit like you have a card for the segment, you have a card for the persona, and then, you can also have a card for the vertical within that segment, but it's all within the context of the general segment, right? So the segment is the umbrella. Then you have under that embraces everything, and then you have these other cards to it, and then these three things combine as a stack that then AI can use to generate. If for then AI you give him a very effective framework for email writing, which I do have as well. We have a very solid framework to be able to, to start with an observation, to go slightly deeper into what is, potential, like the pain that you've observed in other companies, and then what is the value that you provide, and then you have a soft CTA. You have that framework, then you combine the segment information and all the cards with the framework in the email, and then you can generate a really good email. And then you can have a sequence of those emails. And then same thing, you can have a framework for the phone prospecting cold calling script, which we do have as well, a methodology
Yep.
essentially. That's why I think methodology matters. Methodology matters today because it provides a very consistency in the way communication can be leveraged. And then AI can be, leverage AI to basically fit things into that methodology so that everyone is on the same page in the structure. I say to my reps all the time, it's not necessarily about saying things with the words. A script is most important thing of a script, let's say, is the structure it would provide you so that when you're in a conversation, I can follow a flow. And if I get off track because I get an objection or something, I can come back on track in the flow and know where I am. Because otherwise you start winging it, you don't know anymore where you are, you don't know what you need to do, and then you lose yourself.
Mm.
Structure gives you a sort of something to fall back on. And the same is for objection, providing frameworks and methodology on how you handle them more than how you respond to this objection, because people have to memorize those things. And it's really hard. But if I give you the methodology of how you approach any objection, then you can actually deal with that correctly. Now, this is powerful because AI then, when you provide templates, framework to AI, it does a great job, right? Because he has some guardrails and guidelines, and that can be made more consistent across the organization.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me your role in enablement, sales enablement. If there was just one lever that you could pull or one thing you could do to start with into an organization, what do you think would be the one that would have the biggest impact?
I believe that decision has to be made based on the analysis you do. I don't think every organization is different. One thing I would say is that it's interesting, right? Because when I started my career, I've been very focused on, of course, doing the best job I could in terms of whatever I was trying to deliver, whether it's like creating a program, for example. I would want to be as a perfectionist as I am in a positive, connotation, but still perfectionist. I guess the idea was, okay, I can build the best program, like the best discovery program or the best, like, cold calling program and so forth. So very much focus on the content, the training design, learning and development, so forth. What I learned over time is, of course, that often, even if you build the best program and so forth, unfortunately, performance doesn't move. And that because there's so many other factors involved, and it's because the bandwidth for rep is very limited, bandwidth for sales managers is limited. So often the reinforcement doesn't happen. Often the environment or the learning culture isn't there yet, and you're already going too much ahead compared to where the organization is. So, for example, I already started to take into account now when I join a company, what is the level of maturity the company is in from a sales organization perspective in terms of processes and so forth, but also from just generally learning, right? How people are people used to learn ongoingly? Are they
Mhm.
used to use e-learning, for example? Because I've been in an organization when I come in, I try to leverage e-learning, and then it doesn't really engage much because people are not used to e-learning, are used on live session all the time. So then in that case, you want to maybe go a bit more hybrid and start with a heavier, like one, kind of live, but with some elements of e-learning. So you start to introduce the concept slowly, right? And you focus on less things rather than more. Now, what I've learned over time is that environment is the most powerful thing. So when I'm looking at performance, and if you, what I would recommend people is that when you join a company, rather than thinking too much about necessarily immediately like skills and knowledge, to think in terms of environment. And when I say, environment, I mean looking at processes and looking at the most important areas of the business that generate revenue and they are a competitive advantage for the business, understanding whether we have steps and processes defined. Because if we don't, already a good step to start with, especially let's say if you're a medium organization, I'm talking about maybe at least a scale up, in the process of scale up where processes start to become more important. In that case, you want to start to define those processes with the stakeholder, and you can be the one orchestrating that so that everyone is on the same page of what's expected in those processes. And that informs how people that do the steps in the processes have to, are measured on and the standards. Another area is incentives and consequences, for example.
Mhm.
Where are the incentives? Like financial incentives, but also non-financial incentives. Like, do leaders recognize people? Do we have a culture where we celebrate the wins on an ongoing basis? Basic questions. But again, if you notice that these things are in place, most likely great place to start because we know any system works based on incentives and consequences. If I do this and I do it wrong, there is some consequences. And consequences doesn't need to be necessarily like very negative, like you want to build a fear culture, yet you still want to have some consequences in terms of maybe it's like being given a strong feedback, constructive feedback in relation to something. Still, that I would say you can be considered a consequence in the sense that I'm suggesting you an adjustment with some sound feedback that can really change the behavior. Incentives instead is more like how do I reinforce positive behavior? So This is another layer, for example, that you can look at an environment. Then there is also the managerial layer as well. What is the ratio between like manager and reps? Is it a good ratio? Is it a bad ratio? If we have a bad ratio, we have to make a decision there. What do we do? Another question on enablement should be like, do we try and increase and improve that ratio? Discussing this with leadership and giving a sound, let's say, narrative about why? Or do we do something where we can increase capacity of managers by using tech, for example, that are for them? But what's important that I say that because I can also build the best training in the world. But then if the manager doesn't have capacity to coach and support the reps, then that is pointless. As a result of that, it's about the order of things. And that's why I believe like you better off looking at the overall environment in which you are operating in. Look at these levers. And actually, I've developed like a sales environment assessment where the idea is when I work with CROs, I just say, take this assessment. They do it. There are different areas in it. Then I see where they're weaker, right? And then from there, we decide, okay, you by changing actually this thing, you're probably going to get for the least amount of effort, the biggest. And I think
Mm.
that's what I'm looking at right now. So the first thing you're looking at, you're going to look at the things that you can do with the least amount of effort that provides you the biggest return. And that's to be found in the environment of an organization rather than on the actual, in the people itself.
Yeah.
Because the people itself takes time to change. People takes time to change. So if you work at an individual level and I'm trying to develop these skills, this attitude, this mindset, but then the company around it or the culture around it, the environment around it doesn't support such a behavior, such an attitude, such a mindset, then you're basically wasting your time because it's not going to have, you might change a couple of people, but on an organizational scale, the bulk of the people won't change because they will go along with the system. And that's what you've got to change. And then you will see that everything else changes as a result of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The environment that you talk about, the culture, the climate of the organization is probably the single biggest determinant factor on the output of the individuals within the organization. And you mentioned consequences. Consequences don't need to be negative. Consequences are simply what happens after behavior generally. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. No consequence is also a consequence. If you don't deliver any consequence, then that's not going to have an effect either. Have you read the book called Getting the Most Out of People by Aubrey Daniels?
No, never.
I
No, I
can
don't.
strongly recommend that for you. I think you would enjoy it. It talks very much about the impact of consequences on behavior and how best to decide which type of consequences to give and whether they should be, near or in the future. Are they certain or are they uncertain? It's quite a good book. I think you'd enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I just wrote it down now. And there's so much work that has been done actually in the 90s, end of the 90s, which is it's interesting how some of the best book on performance, there is a field called performance engineering, right? Which I think that has already emerged towards the end of, the 90s. And I think it's crazy how in some ways we moved away from some of these models and now some of them are returning. And I think they are an exceptional pieces of work from like, honestly, I would say geniuses of organizations. And again, I think, yeah, there is so much that we can, learn from just by looking at the environment and how an overarching system. It's basically system thinking. And I think today, especially with AI, and as it does more of the individual task and increasing that with AI agents and so forth, like system thinking, strategic thinking, all this kind of stuff are cool, like for us to be able to run things effectively, and it become more and more important from even entry, like more lower level, like role as we
Absolutely.
go up, right? So and final thing I would say in terms of the environment piece that it just came to mind is the fact as well that often, you walk out in an organization and, they're doing so many things. So then if you ask the simple question, okay, can you tell me exactly what are the expectation for, let's say, the reps? What are the standards, the key performance indicator you're looking at? Maybe they tell you that, oh, we've got targets. They've got like a number of, booking meetings they have to do. But then that is it. That is it. But what's important to understand is that if people know exactly what's expected of them, not just for the outcome of, the what needs to be achieved, but also partly to how to guide the actual how of the process too, just to showcase them what is a baseline of good. And then you have that baseline of good. And then around that baseline of good, you can provide feedback, you can coach people because you've got a standard. Most organizations, what they miss is that they don't even know what's expected. Like reps don't even know what's expected of them. Managers don't even know what's expected of them. As a result
Mm.
of that, you cannot give feedback properly. you cannot coach, you cannot create a performance management system around it. You've got to define standards that people are held accountable to. And those standards depend upon the value of the organization, depends on things that are unique to the organizations, but they have to be defined. So simple work that is very basic in a way, but a lot of organizations don't have. And that undermines everything, like absolutely everything. So that's another, for example, environmental factor that you would take into account.
Can I ask you a question? You've got a blog that you've started to write. How's that going for you?
Yeah, it's going well. It's a project I started about 2 years ago. And the reason I started is because I did notice that on Google, when I was searching for enablement related materials, there weren't really very good content. And, often as we know, like things start from our own pains, right? And I had read loads of books on enablement already. There weren't too many. And then, every now and then I would search things on Google, try to find them. And I've noticed that everything was dominated basically by companies that are trying to sell into enablement or sell into sales. Like, so,
Okay.
and you will have the HubSpot, the Salesforce, and as well, like every time coming up because they are so strong as a website. And I've noticed that, hey, I think there is no practitioner that basically is writing and is ranking on Google. Why is that? And I said, and then I made some research. I've always been interested in SEO, and that's what led me to start the blog. And I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to stick to it, write, 5, 6 articles, long form, like a month, and on topics that I find interesting, and I document also my journey. And I did it with a way like that I was trying to also to rank for keywords on Google. And then, first year, of course, very little, right? But then what happened is the last probably 8 months, things started to pick up. And at some point, we reached 1,000 just clicks on organically, just without doing any, sort of like spending
Nice.
any huge money on SEO, just by quality content. And now things are growing really well. Then LinkedIn is a big driver of traffic as well on my website. So right now we can get to almost 2,000, 1,500 to 2,000, visitors a month that come to look. And there's a lot of recurring people on the blog. And yeah, newsletter is going well as well, reaching almost 1,000 subscribers or like leaders in enablement operation and, and also like, mostly that's just sales, of course, revenue leadership. Yeah, so it's been a fun journey and I'm still continuing and I feel privileged to be in a position where now I'm writing and actually people are reading. So that's a nice feeling to reach.
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll have the link to the blog, obviously, underneath the podcast, the link to your LinkedIn and the blog. Is there anything that I've not asked you yet that I should have asked you? Something that a message you want to put across?
No, I think I'm very glad you asked around the question around what would you do in your organization if you get, once you get in. I think it's a very good question. I think it's something that I would have, in this point, if you then ask me, I would have really shared in terms of the importance of looking at the environment. I think,
And can I say the answer you gave, in my mind is absolutely perfect. I've had a long experience, a long career in executive level roles, in sales and marketing roles throughout my life. And I'm a firm believer that it's the leadership in an organization. There's an old saying that goes, the fish rots from the head. And so in the organization, it's the leadership that determines the culture and the environment that the people are in. And it doesn't matter how good the attitude, personality, skills, and knowledge of any individual, if it's not an environment that's going to allow them to perform to their best, then you have the normal to be expected outcomes. You're going to have underperformance, you're going to have increased churn, you're going to have stars leaving, you're going to have underperformance staying. It's not a good outcome for anyone. So I think you've hit the nail right on the head there. And obviously, the approach of, there's not one cookie cutter for any organization because always the climate's different, the people are different, where they're at in their stage of development, the scale of the organization, everything's different. So,
and that's why
very good, nice.
I appreciate it. And I think that's where the most important skill set is, especially if you're a leader that's coming in a function. Like, how do you do the analysis at the beginning, right? So, and because that determines the decision you make and determines where you put your resources and effort. And of course, in a world, especially also as I talk from enablement perspective, where we are really limited in resources, that becomes even more valuable because if you're able to get it right when you make the decision and the call, and then you're able to provide impact early to an extent, then that allows you to get more budget, more resources, which then leads to better things, And when you have more resources, of course, that everything gets a little bit easier in a way because you can tackle more things and even the smaller things. And the final thing, I think what's interesting when you said a non-consequence is still a consequence. I think that's very interesting because when we talk about values and behaviors, for example, we say in a company that these are our values. But then what happens is when someone is behaving in a way that doesn't align with the values, nobody says anything. Then what's going to happen, you think? Because we are not basically from an action perspective giving those values, and we're not correcting it as we see it. As a result of that, then what takes place is just what happens that people are seeing, and it might just be completely the wrong thing. And that is on the job, on the, as you say, leadership and management, but also peers. And that's something you can instill into them on like actually calling it out in a constructive way so that the right behaviors are reinforced. And if there is something that is someone is undermining those values, even if they're giving a good performance sales wise, I believe companies should cut that because it's very contagious and it won't help you in the long run, right? It won't really help you in the long run. And it will just cause more damage than anything, right? I think
Most
so.
definitely. It's a phrase I always use is the standard you walk past is the standard you set.
Yeah.
And so when you're silent, that's ratification. Silence is effectively ratification. That's acceptable.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and the people that are trying to do the right thing, if the leader doesn't stop the wrong behavior, then what chance have the peers and co-workers got to be able to
Exactly.
step up
Yeah.
and have an input? And like you said, conversely, the ideal environment is one where you've got it so that the peers and co-workers feel comfortable in speaking out, knowing that it's not the way things are done around here. But that comes from leadership. It all comes from leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. It's and also the debate around as well. I think one of the things for last thing I will leave like people with this like the difference between management and leadership. And I think that's a very interesting one because often a manager is called a leader, vice versa. But then the question is it management the same thing as leadership? Like it's not. But however, the two things can work very well together because the reality is that first and foremost, you don't need to be a higher up person to be a leader. As probably we know that, right? And the manager is more related, of course, to a position you're having in an organization. But it's all about the balance between structure. So a manager or management is the art of bringing structure into the execution of what we are doing, right? So you're having like clear measurement system, you're having clear performance management systems, and those allow you to basically hold like a certain set of processes and tasks is done to the standard that is required. That's management. Then you have the other side, which is leadership, is that is a lot more about people and it's all about people. And then and it's about, how you're inspiring your people, how you're talking from a why perspective, how you are, also coaching with a human element into it, how you're taking into account the person, not just, looking at them as, as a number. Again, purpose, values, all these elements are all pertaining to leadership. Now, the best leader, call it as a leader, or anyway, the best manager you can say as well, are the one that combine both. And if you're able to combine both, that's when magic happens because you're providing the inspiration, motivation, support, resilience that comes from leadership, combined with the structure, the actual clarity and expectation that comes from management, and you can operate as an organization, especially again when you are at the stage where you're moving away from a startup, you start to become a scale up and onwards. So you start to become more and more important.
And such managers who are also leaders are the ones that we think about in our career who have been the best bosses we've ever worked for.
For sure. Yeah.
Yep.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Federico, look, I thank you. I've got to say the conversation's been outstanding. I'll really appreciate you coming along and joining us. Is there any books that you'd recommend that anyone should read?
Books. Yeah. I mean, I think, is it like you're looking for any books in any area or?
So anything, whether it's, look, I would normally say that something relevant for the audience, but quite frankly, even if you're reading a good fiction book at the moment, then just share that. But yeah, any books in any area is fine.
Yeah, so I think I would recommend to people like there's a book that is not necessarily extremely popular, let's say, or one is one of those best-selling, but it's called The Opposable Mind. And in short, it's called again The Opposable Mind. And the book is simply about what outstanding business people have in common and what are some of the underlying patterns of their thinking. And what they talk about is this idea of integrative thinking, the idea that these people have been able to take extreme ideas that sometimes you might think like as a trade-off, as we discussed before. Sometimes you can be extremely efficient, or you're extremely efficient and lose effectiveness as a trade-off, or you are extremely effective but then lose efficiency as a trade-off. The question becomes, can I actually be very efficient and very effective at the same time, for example? And that's an idea of like integrative thinking, of how you bring extreme mold them into something that is unique and is like in the middle, and that can really provide you a competitive advantage as an organization. So yeah, I found it fascinating in terms of like deconstructing some of the thinking of these people, of very successful organization in the world. So I highly recommend it to people because it's very useful for CEOs, executives, but also if you are like someone who is building a business. Really cool. So the opposable mind. Cool.
Impossible Mind.
Yeah,
Excellent.
the
I like that.
opposable.
Opposable Mind. And do you
Oppos-
know who the author is?
Oh, it's not coming up. I don't have it right
That
now, but I can
that's
actually
fine.
check.
That's fine. We'll find it and put it in the link. That's fine. So, is there anyone that's really influenced you through your career? Someone that you look up to that's inspired you?
Yeah,
With
definitely. I mean, I think I've been very lucky that, I haven't had like a huge amount of mentors, but to be fair, Terry, I've been always a big reader and I found in books actually being my mentors. I don't know, I've always been a big reader. I've enjoyed, always like reading. And I think since reading has been the thing that in the difficult times or when I didn't know what to do, has given me the answers. And so in a way, I haven't been like, I've of course sought out, a mentor. I think is an important thing to do for all of us. But at the same time, I do believe I stress this fact that I think books have something unique to them, which is basically someone has spent probably sometimes even decades or the lifetime to write their words and thoughts into a book. And then you have it right in front of you, like, in your hands. And I think if you approach the book from that perspective, you can really take a lot more from the book because it just brings your mindset of like more attention, more care, more focus into what you're learning because it's coming from actually, the experiences of this person. So in a way, it's a bit like this person is sitting with me, sharing the experience with me. Then I have to make them mine. But then, I think there have been different, some bosses that I've had, especially one that has really allowed me to progress faster in my career. And that has given me, most important, the thing I really appreciate is understanding the value of the right attitude and the right approach to things and gave me the space to grow despite on paper, I might not have had the right amount of experience. Right. And I think
mm-hmm.
that is something that I think today, especially in today environment where things change so fast, experience is good, but at the same time can be a detractor because you might still be stuck on your own old ideas and you're recycling, the same thing over and over again when instead you need to adapt. So I think experience is still important, especially as it relates to people, stakeholder management, leadership, and all this kind of stuff. But when it comes to actually get the job done and so forth, it's not necessarily the case. And I think it's if you find people that are really, have the right attitude, especially they're coachable, they are, they believe they can learn anything. That's the critical one. I've always been one person that, thanks to different experiences, I got to the point where, I know that I can learn anything if I get my mind to and I get stuck in it. So once you have that, I think everything else is open, is
I think having that and a curiosity to learn.
correct.
You ever get to the situation where there's, you don't have that humility and you think that, it's that you're the one that's going to make the change here. You've got your frameworks in place. I'm going to impose that. That's why I like your approach so much. It's the humble approach of, well, we've got to find out where everything's at first. That's the smart way to do it. The comment you made with regards to attitude, there's research was done by the Harvard Business School in terms of what makes how much you can trust an employee. And by trust, I don't mean trust in terms of dishonesty, but trust, how much can I trust this employee to deliver for the role that they're being employed for? And the three components they looked at were skills, knowledge, and attitude.
Okay.
And attitude accounted for 80% of the level of trust that would be delivered. Skills and knowledge is something that can be learned and taught, but the attitude is something that is intrinsically from within. And if you have the right attitude, then that accounts for 80% of your trustability, which is effectively your performance.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And I think as well, like talking about before, like if you get, that's the thing as well, like if you have a big enough number of people that have the right attitude and the environment and the culture of the organization is something that reinforces that type of attitudes and, approach, then you have a chance as well that you can actually make change and improve the attitudes of some other people that might not have been the perfect fit from an attitude perspective. Simply because attitude at the end of the day is a product, if you think about it, in a way we grow up and then, the childhood that we have, how we've grown up, the society we have around. These are the things that shape our attitude in very like intrinsic manners, but still has been shaped over time. It's just that now, of course, it's going to be harder to change by just going into an organization. But still, again, that shows the power of that environment as to the individual. And it's interesting for me because I come also from a place where I've trained myself as a coach as well, because I've always been interested in coaching and being able to do, personal development coaching to business coaching and so forth. Work with executive, with managers, but also with people that are trying to do, better in life, let's say. And what's interesting, I've always had the mindset of, okay, you change the person and you focus on, how do you facilitate change by coaching? And I think it's a great tool, coaching. And I think more managers should have great skill set in coaching. And it's very important. But then, when I started to read things that are more focused on actually away from the person and completely to the environment to extreme levels, that sometimes I was like, oh, wow, it's very like opposing idea in that respect. I found it that I realized that actually it's about the order of things. And that's I think that I'm realizing more and more that it's not, there is many things you can do in a business and they will all have somewhat of a difference. However, it's the skill is the order you do things. And to figure out the order, you need to be able as well to analyze correctly. Because if you figure out the order of things in a correct manner, you then know that you do first this. And then if you do the thing you wanted to do before, like a great training programs and so forth, will have like 10x the impact because you've sorted out the foundation first. So that's in the past, instead, I will go in, build the greatest programs, don't take into account some of these environmental factors, then stay with a feeling of, great program, but not really what I expected.
So what was it that actually drew you into enablement? You were in sales roles
Yeah, yeah,
early in your career. What
yeah.
was it that drew you into the enabler aspect?
What drew me, I think it just happened. First of all, it happens naturally that I was in an organization where was growing very fast and they were asking me to do some training, sales training to people. So that's something that I really, welcomed. And I said, yeah, sure. I'll help out, I want to help. And I started to do it and I found it enjoyable, it was nice. But, it wasn't really like, I didn't know anything about training design. It was more me going into a room and then sharing how I was doing things. And then people would ask questions, typical things, right? And then at that time as well, I was already interested in personal development in general as an individual. And then I started to notice that basically when people were asking me question about things or even friends, and I would provide maybe advice, especially because the reason why they will ask me is because when I was after university, I actually moved to England on my own and I could not speak in English. I was on my own, all this kind of stuff. So it was a big challenge that then really propelled me in terms of growth. And people were asking me all sorts of advice. And I realized that even if I provide advice, things will not change. People won't change. So then I thought, well, maybe there's something about the approach that can change as well to help people better become more aware of what they want to do and the step they want to take. And that's what led me to coaching. Then coaching was I mentioned coaching because coaching was a big, I would say to you, like catalyst for me to getting into enablement, because once I got the coaching certification, my business that I was in realized that I was the only one having some sort of coaching background. And as a result of that, said, hey, we want you now to spend some of your time, like, you can reduce, let's say, quota, spend some of the time actually coaching for one-on-one and group, apart from doing some trainings. And that's why I started. And then at some point, the organization hired a VP of Sales Enablement, which was my first boss, essentially. And because I was going into this direction already, I made the decision to transit into his team. I took a relatively big pay cut because I was doing very well as a salesperson, but I had faith that was the right direction for me. And then I've started to learn things about, first from learning and development, training and development, how do you build onboarding, how do you build great training, et cetera, et cetera. And then moved into other organizations when I started to learn more about the tech stack, how you create a great tech stack. Then I go into as well, like sales methodology implementation, like company-wide, if you are like a large companies. And then, I kind of started adding different elements of enablement into the equation. And then when I look at enablement, I think the way that I say to people to look at it, for simplicity that people are trying to understand it, is that enablement has some pillars. And the pillars are sales training, sales coaching. Then you've got sales content, that is what you send out to the customer, but also like what is internally for the company. Sales methodology implementation and pros, like in a way. And then you have as well technology, enablement technology that you're leveraging. And finally, cross-functional collaboration is the overarching thing that allows you actually to get job done in enablement, because you are by nature is extremely cross-functional. So in a way, like if someone is starting career enablement, generally you want to expose in all these areas once you want to get into a more leadership role, because that way will allow you to build the best function you can build because you understand all the different moving parts of the function. But I love, I'm very lucky. I think I consider myself very lucky. And as I said before, privileged, because I love, the field I'm in is so multidisciplinary. And that's something that I've been able to bring all of the things I've learned in so many areas, even mindfulness, and into what I do. So it's a privilege, I think, to be
Well,
in
it's a
that position.
privilege to have you with us today. I can see your passion about this topic. I can see it jumps through the screen at us. So
Thanks.
thank you very much. So thank you very much for joining us on the chat.
Great to have this conversation, and for sure.
All right. Thank you, sir.